Now. Okay, welcome again, everybody, as if we have not just been talking for the last several minutes. We're glad to have everybody here with Nicole and on our first Tuesday conversation here in the month of April. It's crazy that it's already April, but here we are nonetheless. So we're super excited to talk with you about not just your work with Prison Yoga Project, but also just about you as a person and the sorts of things that you are passionate about. So thank you for being here. I do want to say before we get going that First Tuesdays are just an offering that we give out to anybody and everybody who's a supporter of Compassion Works for All. And we ask a lot. We ask a lot from our donors, from our volunteers, from our supporters. And so we want to be in a position where we're also able to share and to give and to provide something that's very beneficial, and also that builds a little bit of a sense of community, that we see the faces and hear the names of the people that are also doing the work alongside of us. So we're very excited to have you here with us today, Nicole. And there's one or two not housekeeping things, but announcements that I'd like to share. Coming up in May, for the month of May, the first 4 Sundays in the month at 3 p.m., we're going to have an outdoor community meditation time down at Murray Park along Rebsamen Road. And it's near the sand volleyball courts. If you're familiar with that park, it's near the sand volleyball courts. There's a brand new, really cool playground area and this string of pavilions that are there. And on the other side of those pavilions is this really great, just sort of grassy slope that goes down to the water. And so we're all just going to sit out there on the grassy slope and have about a half hour of community meditation time. So that's the first 4 Sundays in May at 3 o'clock. And technically we had to reserve a couple of pavilions so we can legally have people there and not just overwhelm the park. But so we technically have pavilions 5 and 6 reserved. So if there is any rain or bad weather, or if it just happens to be terribly hot, we can also get under the pavilion to do that. So pavilions 5 and 6, and that's the first 4 Sundays in May. We're not going to meet the weekend of Memorial Day. So and it looks like, just from being on Facebook and other social media, it looks like there's all kinds of outdoor public yoga community gatherings and offerings. And so definitely encourage people to take advantage of those while they're out there. So yeah, all right. Well, we've got a couple more people. I'm realizing I'm a little bit dark over here. Our air conditioner is not working currently. Judith, you're good to be at home today and not in the office. Our air conditioner has decided to take the day off. So if I start sweating, it's not because I'm nervous, it's because it's about 86 degrees in here right now. So anyway, that also means we have all the blinds down. So, all right, I am talking a whole lot and it is time for me not to do that. Nicole, we're so glad that you're here with us. I'm just gonna kick it over to you and say, Nicole, introduce yourself. Let us know who you are and what it is that you do.
Yeah, sure. Hi, everybody. It's so nice to see all of you, to feel all of your presence. And I'm honored to be considered as a guest, so thank you so much. I'm Nicole Hellthaler. That last name gets people a lot. Don't feel like you have to remember. When I was a classroom teacher, I was always Miss H. But yeah, so I'm here in Little Rock. I've lived in Little Rock for about almost 4 years now, which is like wild to me. And before that, I lived in El Dorado, Arkansas for 3 years. I was a teacher at El Dorado High School, so I taught history and politics, and that was really amazing, but also challenging. And my time there inspired me to come to the Clinton School of Public Service, where I got my master's degree, and work towards pushing against the school to prison pipeline and the practices that often lead youth to become incarcerated, because it's just so easy to witness all of it when you're a teacher, but to feel like you don't have a lot of control over what happens. So that's kind of what brought me here and now in this moment as the assistant director for Prison Yoga Project, which is a global yoga and prison organization. So have been in total in Arkansas for about 7 years. So I consider like my adult life to be lived here. I'm originally from Connecticut, and I went to the University of Connecticut. I don't know if they're basketball fans, but the men didn't do so hot this year, but our ladies are always fire. So I grew up there. Yeah, so that was kind of backwards from where I am now to where I am then. But I currently, as I said, am the assistant director for Prison Yoga Project. And prior to COVID, I was able to provide a weekly class to youth at Pulaski County Detention Center, which I was there because of Compassion Works for All, and the introduction to the staff there. And it was a really amazing program. And I was really bummed because right before the pandemic hit, they wanted to expand and have more classes. And so it was really hard to be essentially shut out. I can only imagine what it felt like to be shut in and away from people during this time. So yeah, I think I'll stop there, but that's a general who I am.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And so motivated by that school to prison pipeline, you're especially drawn toward youth who are incarcerated.
Yeah.
And from your biography that I pulled off of Prison Yoga Project website, you also spent some time in South Africa and Vietnam. Is that correct?
Yes, both actually. I was so fortunate to study abroad in Cape Town, South Africa as a sophomore in college. Most of the time people go kind of like later in college, but that just really woke me up to just injustice. I like knew it existed, but it felt more tangible there and allowed me to come back to the United States and view my own country through a very different lens. So that kind of got me on the path. And while I was there, I got to work with a yoga instructor with kids with autism. And that was really beautiful. And I think the first time it opened my eyes to yoga not being this just like intense, like acrobatic practice, but something that could be, or that is so much more than that. And then when I was getting my master's, we get the opportunity to do a project abroad. And so that brought me to Vietnam, where I worked with teachers and Teach for Vietnam and trained them in like running their classroom in a way that was trauma informed and disciplining in a way, or discipline is not even the right word, but working with students that are exhibiting behaviors of distress, you could say. And so all of that led me here.
Yeah, that's amazing. My wife, Christina, and I, we work a lot with the foster care world. And so trauma-informed things are a really big part of the work we do there. And I love that you've incorporated yoga into that. And I'm especially curious just about your work with and what you learned about yoga and autism, because that's just such a, such a sensory, but also just the non-traditional, non-normative ways that the body is felt and experienced. And so what did you learn about the connections or the benefits of yoga with children who have autism?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think a lot of people don't ask that, and it was so informative to how I now teach yoga. Just to give a little context, where I was working was a school designed specifically for kids with autism. And so it ranged from age 4 all the way up through like 18. And some of the students were verbal, and like you might not know off the bat right away that they experienced their life through having autism, and some were nonverbal and in need of a lot of support, and all of them were in yoga. So it didn't look as different as you might think. It did, depending on the type of yoga you practice, but it was like a slower pace. And it was a lot more inventive in terms of like what shapes can you make, right? So we did tree pose, but it was very like exploratory with like, what does it feel like to put your arms up, or how does it feel to close your eyes? And no student looked exactly the same, right? And I feel like, again, like if you were to practice in a studio, it's more regimented. Nobody wants to really like stand out. But here it was very much about each individual's exploration of the yoga poses. And I hadn't even at that point understood the concept of trauma-informed yoga, but it was, right? Like giving so much choice and patience and love and trust between the teacher and the students. There was not any sort of like hands-on assistance unless it was a situation in which a student needed that anyways. So a lot of freedom, and they all ended in Shavasana, and they took like essentially a little nap, and they ended up feeling, I think, a little bit more focused after that. There's always this situation where like you're practicing and one of them kind of is like running around the room or something like that, but just kind of welcoming that rather than thinking something's wrong with it, I think was really important.
Yeah. That's incredible. And is that how you got your start in yoga? Like, were you familiar with it already, or was that kind of like your introduction to it?
So I grew up a gymnast. And so I was very familiar with like movement and loving to move, but gymnastics was also very regimented, very like if you're in pain, you push through it kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I think when I first started yoga, I was in college and it still very much felt like something to perform, right? And to like get right. But that was probably my first introduction into, like, as I said, like a different kind of way about yoga. And then I really became serious about it when I was a classroom teacher because it was just so extremely stressful. But I did find, like when I was a classroom teacher, yoga to be kind of challenging in the slow moments. Meditation felt like nearly impossible actually when I was struggling with a lot of anxiety. And so kind of through this process and through learning about Prison Yoga Project, I also came to understand that like you can't be good or bad at yoga. Essentially, it's just like a thing that is, and a resource. And so now I can meditate when I'm stressed, and
Yeah.
it's been very like it's morphed a lot based on the setting that I'm in.
Yeah.
I started around that time. Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's good to hear because I feel like I am quite bad at yoga. So I do it often, but I I'm glad to hear you say that. So how do you begin to describe what yoga is? Like,
Yeah.
if I mean, most people are at least familiar, and I mean, I don't necessarily mean for the people on this call. I'm going to assume that if you're on this call, you have a pretty baseline working, if not active practice with it. But there are definitely folks still, especially in the West, who they hear yoga and they just think all kinds of whirly twirly weird stuff. And so, like, how do you begin to talk about what yoga is?
Yeah, thank you. And I should add too, so even like being in prison yoga, I also am a teacher at Barefoot Studio. And so I operate in like multiple worlds of yoga. So I think a lot about what it is. And I also want to acknowledge I'm sort of like the epitome of yoga in the West, right? Like I'm young, I'm white, I'm a woman, I have an athletic body, like, and so I think yoga in the mainstream can often come across as like quite inaccessible to folks. And so to me, yoga is the complete opposite of that. Yoga is an entryway into the best parts of yourself. Like that's the way that I would describe it. It's movement and breath and tied to a very ancient practice that's all about turning inward. And you can do that in a really fun, hot flow class if that's your thing. But at the end of the day, it's about being able to drop into your body and be okay with your body and whatever you're feeling. And that can be quite challenging depending on your life experience and who you are. But that's what I view as yoga, as to also honor where it comes from, and not just see it as a physical practice.
Right. Yeah. An entryway into the best part of yourself. I like that a lot because I think that we are, especially with our physical selves, we can be pretty critical and harsh with ourselves, especially in the West. And I like that you mentioned that, though, that you are kind of the embodiment of Western yoga. I feel the same way with like mindfulness and meditation because I sort of came into it as a result of this sort of cultural movement toward it that's not necessarily religious, but more of the secular side. And so I'm kind of a result of that swing. And so how do you navigate that? How do you work where you're like I think of my first experience with yoga was with the workout videos P90X. I'd never done yoga until I did P90X, and so it's like part of getting ripped abs and big bulging biceps, and today's yoga day, and it kind of has that feel to it, which I don't think is what it is necessarily always supposed to be, but sometimes I feel that way also with mindfulness meditation. So how do you do anything to kind of deepen your understanding of its origins? Do you do anything to incorporate that into maybe some more mainstream things? That might be a really big question, but how do you handle that?
No, I think that's a great question. And I think that I really do try to find a balance between, like, I never want to appropriate something that was once practiced predominantly by people that aren't white, right? Like I very much want to honor the roots of yoga, but I also think it should be authentic to you, right? And so I read so many books. Like right now I'm reading a book about the dakinis and about like the feminine wisdom, like the female Buddha. And that's really fun. And I don't ascribe to any like specific guru or any specific lineage. I'm just like a person trying to learn. So I think always being open to learning is really important. Um, at the end of the day, I think like because yoga is about accessing yourself, it's also about accessing like empathy and compassion and community. And so I think if your practice is rooted in those things, that's like the best place to start. And then like the body movement is the benefit. I enjoy putting myself in a pretzel. I don't think that's a bad thing. Like if you like doing hot yoga and like sweating, I think all that's okay, but it just goes down to what is the intention behind what you're doing. And then if you're someone who like wants to go into prison, why are you there? Because there's the recognition there's so much trauma, and not just in a prison, like in any setting where somebody's practicing yoga. And so at the heart of it is this practice to ease suffering. And so if you're going in and demanding that somebody like hold a plank pose or get themselves to a point where they're like torturing themselves, that to me is when you lose yoga. So I try to be very non-judgmental of folks and their pathway in, because for many people that is their pathway in, and it's like a necessary step to get there. So I welcome everybody as they are, but try to show up authentically in where I'm at and where I'm learning, and hope that that is enough. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that's it, exactly, I would think the best possible way that we can move through it is to open ourselves up to deep learning, to the recognition. I say quite often at Compassion Works for All, like we didn't invent mindfulness, we didn't invent meditation, we didn't invent any of that. We don't own it. We don't have a copyright or a patent on any of this. Like we're participants in this very, very vast tradition. Yeah. And I think starting from that point tends to give us a bit of a healthier grasp on what we're doing. Will you talk just for a second about your work with juvenile detention and what that was like, and just kind of personally, but also from the yoga perspective, like what, just talk about that for a while.
Sure. I think a lot of people I know, when I say what I do, whether it's going in to teach youth at the jail or just working for a prison yoga project, they're like, aren't you scared? Like that's like it's always the question. And if this isn't your world, I have compassion for you that's your question, right? But it was like so fun. Like that was the word that I used to describe it. And like my biggest fear was like if I'm teaching boys, like, do I have access to a female restroom? Like it was logistical things, like the silly things that you think about. And going in, I was really warmly welcomed by the correctional staff, which I know is not always the case across country, across the globe. And so it's nice having the perspective of like my organization with my own experience. And so it was always about 12 youth, and sadly we're seeing like the same kiddos over and over again, but it's not always because they're like committing a crime or doing the same thing. It's because like their home life might not be as safe as that facility. And so that can be quite sad too. But it was a very comfortable and familiar situation for me because they were no different than the students that I worked with on a daily basis. And they were definitely skeptical at first, like, who is this person? What is she doing? But over time, they came to like really, really enjoy it. And I try to have a lot of fun. Like they don't get to have a lot of fun, nor do they get to have a lot of choice over their body and what's happening to them. Yeah. And so everything was optional. Always. Like if you want to come in and lie down, that is okay. And I kind of had to really make that clear to the correctional officers that like they were not disobeying me, they were not doing something wrong. And so we played a lot of games. They led sun salutations, like a general kind of warm-up movement through yoga that a lot of people do, and they became a really, really active part of it. We also like started with sharing how we were doing. We ended the same way. So if you've taken a studio class, as I've mentioned, it's very like quiet, you do your own thing and you leave. This, we're talking the whole time. And we're talking about why we're doing the practices that we're doing and how it can help you. And it was a really beautiful experience. And I was really sad when we had to stop and I also had a lot of empathy for the staff because this is a really hard time to be in that job. And they definitely warmed up to me over time. And we were going to do a yoga class with them, but then the pandemic hit as well.
Yeah.
So,
Well,
yeah.
yeah, and I'm hopeful that things like that start to pick up soon, especially with the staff. We've been in conversations with the sheriff's department, and just the things that they go through. But I read yesterday the lifespan, the life expectancy of a career corrections officer, so someone who's inside the jail or prison as a security personnel. The life expectancy is 59 years old.
So, yeah.
Because they just take so much stress, so much trauma, and they don't know what to do with it or where to put it, and so it follows them home. It follows them into their inability to sleep, their inability to engage productively with family and with friends, and it takes a toll on them. I don't know how to measure it, but I would assume as much as it takes a toll on the people who are inside, even though their roles are different, and the person inflicting and encountering trauma can be on different sides, but the trauma is still there. And
it's all trauma, right? It's all,
yeah,
like corrections and incarceration is traumatic
yeah,
for everyone involved. And I think you see, so with that, and the life expectancy isn't short because they're like harmed on the job. They do, I think it's like, there's a 1 in 3 chance that they will experience some sort of harm. So I do want to acknowledge that they're living with that, but it's because of
yeah,
alcoholism and divorce and all of the coping mechanisms
yeah,
that people do to deal with trauma, which is not much different than the people that are
right,
themselves incarcerated, right?
right.
And I think it's lower life expectancy even than police officers, right? Because I think
Yes,
police officers are there is a lot of tension right now in society in general with police officers, but overall they're seen as like a heroic
mhm,
profession, and that's not the case with
right.
correctional officers. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's incredibly difficult. Have you also, and maybe not as much in Arkansas, or maybe so. I'll just ask the question rather than giving all these lead-ins. But have you also had to navigate issues of race, not just with the correction side, but also with yoga? Like yoga it's kind of a pretty white person thing to do, just culturally speaking. And so has that been your experience? Is that something that you've had to navigate or work with? And if so, what's that been like?
Yeah, I think I was really fortunate that when I studied in Cape Town, I had the most amazing professor who gave us all this before it was relevant, right, to like mainstream, to understand like what it means to be white and like what I perpetuate just by living, right, and engaging in our systems. And so it takes a lot of reflection to consider like, okay, even just walking in as a white person to a room that is in this experience predominantly youth of color, like just by demanding something of them, I'm reperpetuating this white supremacist like society that we're in. And then on the flip side of that too is I also don't want to be a white savior and assume that I'm here to impart this like teaching that they don't have. Like the beauty of yoga is everybody can access it. And so I've Prison Yoga Project and me, we view this as like, here's a set of tools that you can use for your own healing, right? Like I can't fix you. You are powerful in yourself. You have choice, you have agency in this moment. And to really get away from any sort of power dynamic, we call ourselves facilitators and we call them participants, right? Because I'm not this like all-knowing teacher imparting wisdom. So yeah, I've really, and I'm a huge reader and I have read all the books that are available and I'm constantly engaging in discussion. It's life's work, right? To consider whiteness and my other privileges, right? Of being like able-bodied, of getting a master's degree. There's so many ways in which I'm privileged, and to just recognize all of that, because it can really be a barrier to making yoga accessible for folks that live in different bodies. I'd also say I don't shy away from talking about race. I know it can be taboo in many situations, but like I talked about it as a classroom teacher and I call out my whiteness, right? And I like I talk about it. And I think once a trusting relationship is formed with the folks that you serve, you can get into some really, really good conversation about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it is something that there is, I think, just publicly, culturally, some resistance to, because it's one of those things we're still just not comfortable holding yet, talking openly about race. But it does seem that something like yoga um, requires a certain level of authenticity if you're going to practice it well, and if you're going to um, engage and really gain the benefits, though I know it's not about the benefits, it's about the practice itself. But if you're really going to engage it, it requires some level of authenticity with yourself, with your limits, with your capacities and things like that. And so that's just part of it as well, is just being honest and authentic.
And if I can add really quickly too, I think there's sometimes in mainstream yoga and like memes and Instagram, this idea of like good vibes only, or like
Yeah.
that you have to be this like peaceful, calm, happy person all the time. And I think that's actually really problematic, because then you're not tapping into pain, right? Like it's painful to experience racism. It's also painful to cause racism.
Mm-hmm.
Like like we have mirror neurons. It does not feel good to inflict pain, whether it be emotional or physical, on somebody else. And so you can either use yoga as a vessel to wake up to that and sit with that discomfort and become more comfortable engaging with it, or to kind of push it away. And I'm very much in the camp of using yoga to wake up
Yeah.
to it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Which can be difficult to do. Have you, what has yoga done for you? Like, what has it woken you up to about yourself?
Yeah. Oh, wow. So many things. I'd say that like I understood a lot of concepts intellectually, but I was missing the embodiment component of like life, of what it feels like to like live in a human body. And I think for me as like a young teenager, I didn't like the feeling of like my legs touching. Like I was a gymnast. I
Yeah.
was in this like society where my body was like supposed to be a certain way. And yoga really taught me to be comfortable with my body, and to like feel my body and to just like know it's there. And that was the roots at which I could then go out and be a good person in the world, or try to be a good person. Because if you're uncomfortable with yourself, it's really hard to then do all the things that you want to do and be an empathetic person. And so that's what it did to me, is it gave me my body as a home, right? And I know that that's like really lucky. Like not a lot of people feel that way off the bat, and it takes a lot of work, but that's what it did for me. So even as I've come across like is going through the pandemic, like my own personal losses, I can return to myself. And having that as a foundation, I think is really, really important.
Yeah. Yeah. That's excellent. And that embodiment can be difficult. I know that I feel that as well. And one of my favorite things about meditation is that meditation is not from the neck up.
Yeah.
But that's a line I try to recall from time to time, that it's about feeling and experiencing all of it. Um, Even though there is, especially for those of us, I think if we're in the South, there's a decent chance that we grew up in kind of a conservative, maybe Christian, in my case, very fundamentalist culture, where your body is actually bad, and you're supposed to reject every urge, ignore the flesh, as it's often referred to, and anything that's pleasurable, especially, is like big thumbs down. You're not supposed to like that. But also just any sort of awareness, normalizing talking about your body, being aware of how your body changes and grows and develops. It was all just very taboo and hush hush. And so I love that you bring that up. Just that has awoken within you that connection to.
I think too, like that's, I think, a consequence of colonialism and imperialism, and of certain branches of Christianity kind of like imposing this, yeah, the structure of like you are damned, you are bad, right? Because what yoga taught me was quite the opposite of like I'm actually good, and I just got to tap into that goodness. And the beauty of yoga, as well as like yoga, even Buddhism, it can all be practiced in line with religion. So it's not intended to like say any specific religion is wrong or bad, but it's a life practice you can incorporate into other forms of spirituality as well.
Yes, yes, and it's so one just informs the other quite often, and just adds depth and layers to it. Yeah, yeah, I love that. Will you talk to us about Prison Yoga Project? What is that, and why should we be fans of Prison Yoga Project?
Yeah, I would love to. I've done this so many times, and every time I say something, it's slightly different. But we are an organization that brings trauma-informed yoga and mindfulness to people that are incarcerated. So that can be jails, prisons, youth centers, all the above. So we provide direct service. We also provide a lot of training. So we have a foundational training for folks, not even necessarily who want to go inside, but who want to understand yoga through this lens of trauma and incarceration. And we have lots of other trainings as well. And then in addition to that, we have a book program where any person that's incarcerated can write and receive a free book on doing yoga inside. And so for the longest time, it was just one book, but now we have a book specifically adapted for the female experience. So it relates to hormones and pregnancy, or the female body, biologically, I should say, because we also have a lot of trans folks who are incarcerated and I want to honor them as well. So we do all of that. And then my role as assistant director is considering like the organization itself and its sustainability and how we can best offer our practices. And really one of our long-term goals is for yoga to become a paid service in correctional facilities. Like this is a really strong therapeutic rehabilitation, right? Like it's a therapeutic intervention. Its efficacy is beginning to really be proven in empirical studies. And so we want this to be mainstream, like the new mainstream, right? Like we want every person that's incarcerated to be able to practice yoga because we know the benefits of it, right? It can reduce stress, aggression. It can make the experience of incarceration less traumatic. And then it can also give people the tools once they're released so that they're not reoffending. Helps you self-regulate, make better choices, make empathetic choices. And it's just honoring that like the current system is very messed up. It doesn't work. And it's, as I've mentioned, traumatizing for everybody involved. So just figuring out ways to do better by our most vulnerable people is really at the heart of what we do.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And it's been around for a while.
Yeah, James, the founder, has been teaching for almost 2 decades at San Quentin State Prison, where it started. And it really started just as him working with another organization, Insight Prison Project, doing like emotional literacy and yoga. And then he began teaching and began traveling to teach other folks what he was doing. Because at the time, yoga in prison, what? Like trauma wasn't a buzzword yet. And so he was really doing this before it was popular. I don't know if it's considered popular now, but in my field, it is. Right? So he's done it for a long time and slowly built a community of folks that are really, really jazzed up about this work.
Yeah, that's amazing. No, I say the same thing about Compassion Works for All, that our wonderful founder, Anna Cox, started doing it back in the early 90s. So I always say since way before it was cool to be mindful and meditative. Yes, no, that's fantastic. And then you're international, is that correct?
Yes. So James also began to travel internationally and introduce his teaching because I should back up and say like there's a specific type of yoga that we're teaching, right? There's all these different lineages of yoga. Our view is that we must be trauma informed. So we don't have any like set routine or rules that you have to follow. But we talk about creating a space that can be one for healing and practice and movement and community. And so he went and taught that to other folks. And we have this really amazing partner and director of programs in Europe, Josephine Wickstrom, who is teaching in the Swedish prisons there. And then we also have programs in the Netherlands, in Australia, in Israel. We're hoping to translate the book into Hebrew.
Wow.
We're hoping to have programs in France. We have lots of programs in Mexico. So it just happened organically as a result of these trainings and in my role, I'm working on better capturing that so we can summarize that data and I can give you very specific numbers, but we grew very quickly. So now it's just about, again, capturing that.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And so it's sort of spreading nationally, or sorry, internationally into various countries and translating into different languages. And I know that you mentioned that you're wanting to make this mainstream here in the United States. What do you like? If you were to say, okay, we know we're successful because this has happened, like how do you answer that? How do you start to talk about that?
We're successful based on the experience of the people that we're serving. So success looks very differently, but at the end of the day, I'm very intent on harm reduction and not imposing more harm in a system that is so harmful. So at the basic level, we're going and we're serving something that's trauma informed, creating community, and in the moment serving people for the best. What we measure is how stressed they're feeling, if they're self-reporting less aggression, if they're self-reporting better sleep, and overall that the experience is a good one for them. So we have surveys that we offer. We consult with the teachers or the facilitators, as well as staff to get feedback on how the program is going. And then we stay in touch, especially with a lot of folks from San Quentin that James has served for so long. And we hear from them about how they're doing, and we learn about the ways in which yoga has helped them on the outside, which is a lot like, inside outside, how we refer to it. And from what we've heard is these practices become really helpful on the outside when life is very, very stressful in different ways. So if there's a complete lack of agency in prison, there's almost too much agency once you're left to make all these decisions and find a place to live and a job and meet parole, all these things. And so it's also how they feel once they've been released, or if they're never released, what is their quality of life? So those are just some of the things that we measure, because we want them not to recidivate or not to return to prison or jail, but also like, are they a little bit happier? Or better about themselves?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I'm so glad you used that word. In fact, this morning I had a class with our guys over at Pulaski County Jail, and we're still doing it through Zoom right now. But we actually talked about that, about just being happy. And they were like, happiness never crosses my mind. I'm sitting in jail. I'm not thinking a lot about being happy. And I kind of challenged them on it. I was like, why not? Like, we all want to be happy. Like, that's could very well be a lot of the behavioral patterns, maybe even addictive behaviors that you've had, are in an effort to try to find some happiness. So let's talk about that. And we actually had a really good and fun conversation about happiness. And that to me is a quality that I think the yoga, meditation, mindfulness worlds, everything that connects mind and body, connects us and grounds us in the present moment. I feel like that's got to be one of the overflows, is just a genuine happiness, joy about life, and not a Pollyanna way that we just ignore all of our problems, but an inner peace and inner strength and inner resilience that helps us with that.
Yeah, just that like the inner happiness, the kind that makes it okay to be with yourself, I think is so important. And I was gonna say something else in relation to that, but it's slipped my mind. I just think that their quality of life matters too. And I know that things have happened, and I feel for victims and victims' families, but it's likely that like something also happened to the folks that are incarcerated. And hurt people is what we like to say, and healed people heal people. So yeah.
And so what's your response? This will be my last question, and then I want to open it up just in case other folks who have joined in want to comment or ask questions. But so how do you respond to the sort of pervasive cultural belief that, if you can't do the crime, then, or if you can't do the time, don't do the crime, and that we ought to, especially in Arkansas, we need to be tough on crime, which means just be really, really mean to people when they commit a crime. So what's your response to that way of thinking?
I have a lot of different avenues I take. So I do consider myself an activist, right? In like, separate from my job of like speaking out and making it known, the things that I think are important, but also it depends on my audience. So if I'm talking to somebody that's like not super into the work I'm doing, or does have this very like eye for an eye mentality, I hit them with the facts, right? That like, it's really expensive to incarcerate people, like so expensive, like over $100,000 a year for one person, right? Or one youth. And I don't know the specific numbers for Arkansas off the top of my head. So it's not like, it's not working with your tax dollars. If I can't get them at like at a heart level. And then like on a compassionate level, just trying to share stories of my experience, and just like, this is what I've learned, or this is what I see, and trying to get them on a heart level of sharing those stories, and encouraging people to like watch documentaries like The 13th, or read this book of poetry about a youth that was wrongly accused, like really trying to get on an emotional level and wake people up, because likely you feel pain for that person. It's just uncomfortable. So again, it depends on my audience, but for the most part, if someone's skeptical, I just talk about the science, and what we know to be true about trauma is that it lives in the body. So no matter how much therapy somebody has, like your body reacts to a threat. And if somebody has experienced a lot of trauma, everything is going to be threatening. So until we can heal that, people are going to continue to harm people because they feel threatened. It's just a basic mechanism that has been with us for eons, right? That we self-preservation. And so we need to transform society so that people don't feel like they constantly have to fight to survive. And so just pointing that out, especially to people that have committed a crime, or feel like there's something wrong with them. Your body's actually working. Like your trauma is an example of your body trying to protect yourself. And I do one thing that really irritates me, I will say, is when folks will say like, well, it's just genetics that people of color have higher blood pressure. No, that's racism, right? Like, no, there are very specific like examples of racism in like our medical institutions, and again, hit them with the facts, right? So that was a really long-winded, all over the place answer, but the more you read and the more you're open to it, the less you can ignore that there's like truly a lot of issues with happening in our country.
And like you say, I mean, just bottom line, is it working? I don't know that many people would say, yeah, our criminal justice system works great. I think just even on that level, like, let's talk about what's good and what's not good.
If you have a hard time empathizing for people incarcerated, start with correctional officers and their life expectancy, right? Like, just give them an entryway. But if anybody just had the opportunity to meet the people that we are fortunate enough to work with every day, they would not think the things that they do. Like, it would be impossible, because they would see their humanity. I think the easiest way to harm somebody is for us to not think of them as people. But once you do that, that quickly goes away.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Very well said. All right. Well, I'm out of questions here on my list, so I want to open it up to the folks that are here on the call with us. And I'm going to get on Facebook here on my phone, just see if there are any comments there that people are leaving. But if anybody has a thought or a question or a comment for Nicole, feel free to unmute and jump on in there if you'd like.
Excuse me.
I will say hello if you can hear me.
We can. Hello there,
Thank you. I am not hiding in my cave, but I am technologically challenged. So I don't know how to show who I am, but this is Anna. Nicole, I'm very, very happy to meet you and hear what you are saying. Corey and Judith, who I know, I'm glad to say hello to you and anybody on Facebook. But Nicole, thank you so much for sharing all of the information and wisdom and kindness. It makes me so happy to hear what you are giving, especially to the young people that you are being with in your programs. And what you are giving to them and what your programs are giving to people all over the world, what your friends and partners are doing. This is so important. So thank you. If we can all just take a little bit of what you're saying, incorporate it into our lives, because we all have that trauma-based wound that we can be working with every day. Thank you for your good heart. So keep on going.
Thank you, Anna. I appreciate that so much.
Thank you, Anna. It's so good to hear from you.
Good to see you all. Bye.
All right. Any other questions or thoughts for Nicole?
Hey, Nicole, this is Joy. I have a question.
Mhm.
So I've been a teacher for quite some time, but have just started working with Hope Rises with women that are transitioning, are in a reentry program. And so it's pretty new. And the reason why I want to get into this is because I want to be a better teacher for specifically related to trauma informed teaching. And so as I was preparing for this class and we were getting the space ready, like the women were forced to help me clean, and it kind of triggered a thought, and I was like, oh, wait, this is not how I want to approach this. And so I was talking to the woman who leads the program, and just kind of expressed my concern. And she was like, well, you have to understand that, and I'm just going to speak bluntly the way that she did to me, but she was like, you have to understand these are addicts. And if there is an easy way to, if they can get out of something, or if there's an easy way to quit, they will take it. And so I really need your help to prevent that, from happening. And so I meditated on it. I thought about it a lot, and it really concerned me. And so the first thing that I did was just kind of, like you said, survey. I gave them surveys, and then one-on-one talk to each person to kind of understand with any physical or other issues that they may have. So that allowed me to come to the class and know, hey, I'm going to give this woman such and such for these poses because she's got pins and rods in her ankle or knee, so I was just starting with the tangible. Now, luckily, all of the women have been very engaged from the very beginning. So I haven't had that issue yet of, someone just not wanting to be there or needing to just rest, like you said. And that needs to be their practice for that day, is to just, find some relief. So I'm, obviously just in the beginning stages, but I just wondered if you would talk a little bit more about that. Any maybe like specific instances that helped you work through that would be really helpful.
Sure. And what I'm hearing you say is you want to deliver this class in a way, right, that feels trauma informed and good for folks, but the environment in which you're offering in still feels sort of confining and like putting things on them. And so the first thing I thought of when you were sharing is just that the person referred to them as addicts. And we really try to think of them as people first, right? And so like it's a person who uses substances, but right, they are a person first. And so just like that off the bat, I think opens my mind to like, they might struggle with substance use, but they all have unique reasons as to like why that is a result. So just viewing them in their full humanity, which it sounds like you are doing, because it's not denying what they might struggle with, but just again, their recognition is they're a person first, right? They're not this like robot that operates in a specific way. What you shared about like forcing them to clean up, I experienced with the youth where they make them move the tables back once we're done with yoga, and I help, like I do it too. And so many times correctional officers are like, oh, you do not have to do that. And part of this is just, I truly think like Southern hospitality as well, of like, I'm a small woman and they're like, you don't have to do that. But I always do. Like, I literally always do. So whenever I can participate in something that levels the playing field, I try to do. So you helping them, like, beautiful, keep it up. And then I'd say it's their thoughts or their openness to what you're doing isn't going to change overnight. So what's really like required of you is a resiliency and an ability to like show up time after time and keep doing what you feel is appropriate. And so like, I got a lot of pushback on the kids lying down, but eventually I didn't, because they started to witness that like something good was happening in that space. And so I think it's almost normal to like expect the pushback, and it doesn't feel great, but just know that like that bit of resiliency is like you kind of disrupting things a little bit, right? Or the status quo. So hang in there is what I'd say, because it really takes time, and it takes a strong person, and it sounds like that is totally who you are. And then finally, I'd say what you can do in your time with them is continue to offer as much choice and agency as possible, right? Because you can't control the entire system or their protocols or things like that, but you can normalize for that hour or however as much time it is, complete choice on their end. And so it sounds like you're doing all of those things already. It just, again, takes time and relationship with the staff. So if you have any opportunity, I know when they were kind of asking me why I was doing certain things, I said, I'd love to teach you a class and give you some background on my methodology. And they actually were super interested, and I did not expect that. And so if you have any kind of opportunity to like explain yourself or involve the staff, I wouldn't have them do yoga together with them, because that can be another form of maybe not being as trauma informed, but any opportunity to educate them can help them come to like your side on it and not have this like us versus them. Is that helpful? Because I feel like, again, you're doing a lot of stuff right. Okay.
Yeah. I'm going to brag on Joy for just a second. She's over at Hope Rises. That's part of our plan at Compassion Works for All has been to expand into reentry centers. And so we've got a meditation group for the men's reentry center over at Hidden Creek. And Joy has taken the bull by the horns over at Hope Rises. And every once in a while we exchange emails, and I'm like, hey, you need anything? She's like, nope, good. We are moving forward, and I am running the show. So it's been amazing. So yeah, very thankful for Joy for the work that she's doing over there. And I love, this is the second time that you've mentioned that, just the idea of choice and agency over your own body and over your own space. And I've never really put those two things together for people that we're working with who are incarcerated, and just how little they have while they're incarcerated. But then, like you said, just too much whenever they get out. And I love that. And I bring that up just to say, I'm going to spend more time thinking about that and how we incorporate that into what we do, because that's so just, you might not be able to determine where you are physically, but you can determine how engaged you are with your mind and body while you're there. And that opens a lot of conversations and layers.
Well, in yoga and meditation, right, there's this concept of like being blocked and things being stored. And like what trauma is your inability to protect yourself, right? And so you're stuck in this reaction or in this like moment that you can't get out of. And so to then be in an environment where you sometimes don't even get to choose when you use the bathroom, that is so hard on the body. And I think they get more freedom in reentry, but not always. Like some places are still really
regimented, right?
Yeah.
Very good. Well, I said I wasn't going to talk anymore. Any other thoughts, questions, comments for Nicole?
Hi, Nicole. I was just wondering if you have any suggestions for teachers who might be interested in incorporating yoga into their classroom, but aren't comfortable with actually leading a yoga session.
Yeah. And so just like a public, like a school. Yeah. So I think just in general, like if you're passionate about it or you've done mindfulness or movement, sharing your story with the the kiddos can be really great because they love to get to know their teacher and like know things about them. And that can make it more accessible. And then I think explaining the why behind what you're offering. So there's this really great like theory in education called conscious discipline, and just like an awareness of, as a teacher, how you're reacting to a situation and an awareness of how a student is reacting. And I think explaining to them what fight or flight is, if they don't already know, is really accessible, and kind of like saying, like, when you're scared or when something's happening, this is what your body might want to do. So we're going to try some breathing, or we're going to try this right now to see if that can make us feel more calm. And then I explain to them, like, literally there's the lower part of our brain, right, that causes us to react, but the front part of our brain, this is where we make good decisions, and this is where we want to be when we're learning, right? Because if we're scared or uncomfortable, you're not going to remember stuff. So it's a benefit to teachers that we feel strong and confident and happy in our bodies. And so there's a really great TED talk on this. Like if you just even YouTube conscious discipline, they explain the brain. And I think your ability to explain it to students will then be an entryway to them practicing these things. And then I'd say with movement, you do not have to do anything in particular. It doesn't even have to be a yoga pose, but just inviting like a mindful moment to like let them breathe or look at a cool image, to stand up and circle their arms or move from side to side. Very simple movements in between, like moments where you have a pause, can also be really great. So that's where I'd start, is some general movement and a little bit of explanation of how their brains work. That can be really helpful.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. And
Yeah.
we had a comment on Facebook along that line, Hannah Barnes. It's amazing because I have a preschool kiddo with special needs who happened to be lucky enough to have a yoga teacher for a preschool teacher this year. And they practice mindfulness and yoga every morning. It has made a world of difference in her stress levels at school.
Yeah.
And we worked with LRSD teachers this year before school started, and went through some mindfulness training with LRSD teachers. And it was exciting to get to share with them, just even drawing from my own memories as a student, when math teacher called on me, and I'm terrible at math, and I'm in that lower brain, and I like physically incapable of doing any sort of mathematical processing. But of course, as a kid, I don't know that. I just know I'm sweating profusely and shaking and having this whole reaction. But being able to share with teachers that this is what's happening in your kids' brains, but this is also what's happening in your brain whenever
as you react, right? Like if you feel threatened,
yeah,
and this is where that, like, this is a bad time to interject this because I know we're out at the end, but like my first year as a teacher, I wrote up more students of color than white students. And I had to really sit with that and understand why I was doing that. And it was because on a very visceral level, I was feeling threatened. Yeah. And once I came to terms with that, of like my own racism, my own discomfort, I never did that again, right? And I kind of ended up like never writing up students. But it's just an important thing to reflect on, right? Of like, we're very conditioned to be scared of certain people. And that includes with kids, with teenagers, and they don't deserve that, right? Like they deserve to be loved and supported. And so, yeah, I feel like that's a way to conclude everything we talked about, but that's what yoga and mindfulness gave to me, right? It's like, how am I acting in this moment? And then for kids, how can you model that for them and also teach them what's happening in their own bodies? Because you get to jail and prison, and I got to sit in on one of y'all's meditations, and we chatted for a couple of minutes. Like, people don't understand the science behind fight or flight, not just people incarcerated, in general, right? They don't know what's happening. So if we could just educate everybody about this,
that would be good.
Yeah, it would be awesome.
Yeah, well, let's do that then. We will all set out together to try to accomplish that. All right. Well, we have hit the 2 o'clock mark, and so I want to be respectful of everybody's time. But Nicole, thank you so much. And we do have a comment here on Zoom from Robbie, our fantastic MSW intern. I love what Nicole is discussing and educating us on. I can't talk on the video. Wanted to thank her for talking to us. Her talk in the incorporation of yoga makes me think about the trauma center in Houston that uses yoga as a modality for the trauma patients and clients to learn to listen to their body and as a treatment if appropriate. Yeah, oh, that's fantastic. Thank you for passing that along, Robbie.
Hi, Robbie. If it's the same Robbie that led the awesome meditation class.
Yes, we are fans of Robbie here at Compassion Works for All. All right. Well, guys, thank you all so much for being with us. Again, just in case you didn't hear at the beginning, the first 4 Sundays in May at 3 p.m., we're going to gather for outdoor community meditation time at Murray Park over on Rebsman Road near the sand volleyball courts. We'll just be out in the grass near the water. And you can come on out. We've got some pavilions reserved, and so we'd love to have you out there for that. Tell your friends. And then next month for our first Tuesday conversation, we have Ann Adams, who's going to join us. She lives in Arizona, and she works with people. She's a registered nurse, and she works with pain and pain management, and uses a lot of mindfulness techniques in helping people deal with pain. So we're really excited. She started her own organization called Crush the Pain. So she's going to talk about that. And so that'll be our guest next month. So we're excited to hear from Ann. All right. Well, this has been so fun. Yes. Thank you so much. It's great to see everybody. And this will be recorded and put on our website. So if you ever need to access it again, it'll be there for you. So everybody have a great week.
Bye, y'all.